Good afternoon to all. Welcome to this webinar on India and France in the Indo-Pacific towards a stable and sustainable future. So we're all gathered here today to discuss India-France relations. I am Abhijit Singh. I'm a senior fellow at the ORF and I head the Maritime Policy Initiative. I will be the moderator for today's session. Before we proceed, I invite our guests to make their initial remarks. Might I just lay the context for today's discussion? The ORF, along with the French Embassy here in New Delhi, is curating a series of discussions on India and France in the Indo-Pacific. Our intention is to get experts together to ideate and brainstorm and come up with ideas on how we can construct, as I said, a more stable, a more secure, and a more prosperous future for ourselves. But what we're going to try and do today is we're going to use this discussion on India and France as a segue into a more broader discussion about EU or the European Union in the Indo-Pacific and what's its strategy going to be. By way of opening remarks, might I just say that ever since France has assumed the presidency of the EU, there has been a new vigor, a new anticipation of what might happen going forward. A lot of us here in New Delhi are looking at the policy proposals by the European Union very, very closely and carefully, and hoping that there will be more opportunity to cooperate in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. Given the recent developments, including what's happening in Ukraine, it does appear that this is not going to be a very straightforward undertaking for any of the countries involved, neither for France nor for some of the other European countries. And even for India, I think the situation looks a bit complicated at the moment, but I'm going to leave that for our guests, for our invitees to discuss. There have been a set of 5 questions that have been circulated about what we plan to discuss in this particular webinar. I'm going to only go through the first question, which is really the big question, is whether the EU is prepared to play a bigger geopolitical role in the Indo-Pacific region, and does it see a partnership with India as sort of supporting that larger endeavor to play a bigger political and security role, or also an economic role in the Indo-Pacific. But I'm going to quickly first introduce our guests. First, it's my honor to welcome Ambassador Christophe Penot, the French ambassador to the Indo-Pacific. The ambassador is an authoritative voice on France's evolving strategic posture in the Indo-Pacific region, and in my opinion, really the best person to be speaking to us on this issue, to provide us an authentic view of what France and Europe feel about the Indo-Pacific and the unfolding policies in the Indo-Pacific region. Welcome also to Dr. Valérie Niquet, the head of the Asia Department in the FRS, which is one of France's leading strategic think tanks. Dr. Niquet is an adjunct senior fellow at the Japan Institute for International Affairs and also a lecturer at Keio University at Tokyo. Her expertise is in China and Japan, and I'm looking forward to hearing a typically French perspective of China's role, perhaps in the Indo-Pacific going forward. What does she make of that? The China dimension to the Indo-Pacific region. On the Indian side, we have Ambassador Mohan Kumar, chairman of the RIS, another leading think tank here in Delhi. Ambassador Kumar is a former ambassador to France and a prominent expert on trade and investment issues, a regular contributor to ORF events, and also writes for us quite often. Welcome to have you, sir. From you, as I was mentioning earlier, we would look forward to getting a sort of economic perspective of where our relations are headed. Lastly, but not the least, we have Shrestha Nishat Ahmed. She's an associate fellow at the NMF, the National Maritime Foundation, one of India's foremost maritime think tanks. And from her, we can expect a maritime appreciation of the Indo-French and the Indo-EU relationship going forward. Very happy to have all of you in our midst. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to first give the floor to Ambassador Penot for his opening remarks. Sir, you have the floor. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think it's okay. Well, let me just make a few remarks about the EU strategy and also about the recent ministerial forum that was held in Paris on 22nd of February. So the first point would be why the EU Indo-Pacific strategy is important to the countries of the region and more importantly, what difference can it make? As you know, the European Union already has a strong presence and wide-ranging interests in the Indo-Pacific. But I believe that the publication in September of 2021 of the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific was a major milestone. It is true to say that the 27 members of the Union do not have the same degree of interest, I would say. Or
but we lost you for at least 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I don't have any other means to connect because this kind of connection that you provide is not allowed in our system. It's very silly and very, but that is the way it is. No, I think the going to the point, the main ambition of the EU strategy in the Indo-Pacific is really to propose an alternative model of cooperation throughout the region by promoting multilateralism, upholding the rule of law and international norms, supporting also an open and fair environment for trade and connectivity, of course, and green transition, as well as supporting the response to global challenges. So the EU does not approach the Indo-Pacific from a confrontational angle. The vision that we have is clearly multidimensional, based on the recognition that we must address all the challenges at once. Security challenges, of course, which are acute and very important, but also economic challenges, connectivity challenges, development challenges, the fight against climate change, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. We do not wish to prioritize military competition, which could only lead, in our view, to increased tensions in the region. And also the EU wants to promote a cooperative approach. The strategy is based on the vision that multipolarity is key to the future of the Indo-Pacific, that there are many important powers apart from China and the US, and that countries of the region do not wish to be drawn into a binary or bipolar approach. And we can see that like-minded countries in the region have already made a difference by acting together or by building unilateral or bilateral partnerships. And let me say also that because it's a key point in our discussion today, that I believe that India is a key partner in the Indo-Pacific. It is already for France, of course. I will not go into details about that, but it should be also a key partner for the EU. And it is considered as such in the European strategy. We have the India-EU Strategic Partnership, which was published in 2020. And 2021 was, I believe, a crucial year with the first ever summit meeting held during the Portuguese presidency of the EU, the resumption of the negotiation of a trade agreement, and also the inaugural EU-India Maritime Security Dialogue. I can see that the EU strategy and the publication of the EU strategy was very much welcome in New Delhi and perceived very positively. So there is still a great potential to explore, I believe, and I think that the India-EU partnership is today in a very good place. I don't have much time to tell you about which should have been my second point, about the EU Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum that was held in Paris on the 22nd of February. It was, in our view, a great success. First, it was the first event of its kind at this level, and gathering countries from both the EU and the Indo-Pacific. We had a very good turnout from both sides. All 27 member states, of course, were represented, most of them at ministerial level. But we had also about 26, a good balance, 26 EU Indo-Pacific countries, as well as 4 regional organizations. And we fulfilled, and I will conclude on that, our 2 main objectives, which were, number 1, to reaffirm the importance of the Indo-Pacific for the EU, as well as the increased long-term engagement of the EU and its member states through concrete actions in that part of the world. And number 2, during the roundtables, we were able to discuss and I think identify also very concrete actions that will give more flesh to the EU strategy. For us, the forum was a way to reinforce the focus, very clearly, to reinforce the focus of the EU on the Indo-Pacific, and I believe that it was a major staging post towards more cooperation between us in the future. Thank you, and sorry for the connection problems.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was a very clear exposition of the French position on the Indo-Pacific, and I quite sort of agree with some of your propositions. I also think that France has been very clear about its core interests and its core principles in the Indo-Pacific region. One of the things that I found interesting about not just France's Indo-Pacific strategy, but also the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy was that it made the observation that there's not just a convergence of interests in the space, but there's also a confluence of thought that is happening in terms of, the whole push towards a rules-based order by a number of countries, insisting on common principles such as, freedom of navigation, or be it transparency and good governance, and things like commercial viability of projects, local ownership. All of that is something that resonates quite nicely with us here in India. But I might actually have one question for you, sir, before I turn to our second speaker, which is that France has always focused on strategic autonomy and multipolarity, and sort of sharing the burden of what needs to be done in the Indo-Pacific region. I would like to know from you is that, given what we are seeing happen in Ukraine, and Russia's war in Ukraine, which is primarily a continental war, are there any chances, any prospects that there could be a rethink on the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy? Because there are some experts that are pointing out that the real challenges are still on land, and that what's happening at sea is still sort of secondary. How do you see this playing out in the future? Will there be a recalibration of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy and France's own approach towards the Indo-Pacific?
Can you hear me? In a few words, I think it's a bit early to draw consequences from what is going on in Ukraine. It's clearly a major crisis. It's clearly a crisis which will have major consequences, and has already had major consequences on the EU policies and the EU posture. I don't believe that it will have a strong impact on the EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific, because I believe that there was a clear recognition from all member states and EU institutions when we drew this strategy that the Indo-Pacific deserves an attention of its own, and that it is an important, very important part of the world where we have very strong interests and where a lot is at stake for us as well. So I don't think that will change. But clearly, the Ukraine crisis gives us an even stronger focus on European affairs, on the way we envisage our relationship with Russia and so on, but also more globally about what the EU stands for in the world. And I think on that, we will see, and you already see, major changes in the EU posture. But once again, I don't believe it will affect in the long term our capacity to engage and to strengthen our engagement in the Indo-Pacific, because we have strong interest there. That's simply the reason. So,
yes. So next up, I'm going to invite Ambassador Mohan Kumar to provide his perspective, his views on India, France, and India-EU ties. I'm aware, sir, that you've for long been a proponent of closer India-France relations, but I'm wondering what you make of our bilateral ties at this very delicate moment. The floor is yours,
sir. Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Abhijit. It's a pleasure to be on your show. Look, I'll begin by agreeing with Ambassador Penot to the extent that I think the Ministerial Forum for the Indo-Pacific was a laudable initiative. The chairmanship of European countries is only for 6 months, so one should not exaggerate the influence that these countries have. France has it for 6 months and then it hands over to another country. So I wouldn't exaggerate the influence that France can possibly have. As far as your first question is concerned, does the EU believe India is a key partner for Indo-Pacific? Does France believe India is a key partner for Indo-Pacific? I would say the latter is completely true. For France, there is no question. India is a key partner. France is the only country that has real estate in Indo-Pacific in the form of Reunion Islands and so on. So there is no question. For Europe, I think it is of a lesser order. I know I'm speaking under correction. Others might disagree, but my sense is Europe has other priorities, and it is very, very hard in the best of circumstances to arrive at European unity on something like Indo-Pacific. I think a huge attempt has been made. I commend the effort, but it's not easy. Convergence between India and Europe on China policy. Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? They don't have a border with China. So they have the luxury of taking positions which India cannot take. We have our soldiers in Ladakh and they are getting killed. So your policy towards China is bound to be different, which is why Ambassador Penot talks of a policy towards Indo-Pacific which is non-confrontational. I don't know if India can afford that because we have a border with China. So that is something that I think we will have to keep in mind. Having said that, the Ministerial Conference or Ministerial Forum on Indo-Pacific had 3 roundtables. One on connectivity and digital, the second on climate change, and the third on security. I find a lot of similarity between the American Indo-Pacific economic strategy and the EU Ministerial Forum, particularly with regard to connectivity and digital and with regard to climate change. So I think we should have and try an economy of effort so that we are all on the same page. That is something that I would recommend. Does Ukraine change the narrative, the security narrative? I think Ukraine could provide a serious distraction from Indo-Pacific for Europe. As Ambassador Penot said, it is more existential interest for Europe than Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is far away. This is on the border, and this is of much more existential interest. My worry is I don't mind if it is a short-term distraction, but it doesn't look like it will get resolved in a hurry. If that is the case, a lot of us in India feel, and again, this is a matter of opinion, you can disagree with it, they will suspect that Europe will be totally devoted to efforts towards this issue. And therefore, it'll be very difficult for Europe to focus on Indo-Pacific. Well, I can go one step further. The worst nightmare for countries like India is a Sino-American rapprochement. There are already voices which are telling the United States the main enemy is Russia, not China. And that could be a real problem for India, frankly, because, you know, We can discuss it if time permits. So finally, I do believe at the end of the day, India will be key to Indo-Pacific. But I take the view, Abhijit, if you allow me, we will have to rely on our own resources, our own ingenuity at the end of the day, because we have a maritime border in the Indian Ocean. We have a land border with China. We have an existential interest to keep the Indian Ocean free from foreign interference, make sure the sea lanes of communication are open. So we can, I think, cooperate with France in the Indian Ocean theater, and we can cooperate with the United States in the Pacific theater. That's one way of doing it. We can use fora like the Quad. We can use trilateral fora like the India, Australia, Japan trilateral. And we can use, of course, other fora like ASEAN Central Regional Fora to try and build a hub and spokes network in Indo-Pacific. And depending on the issue, you cooperate with different partners. I still see EU as being very important, but I'm only saying that for some issues, we can cooperate with EU. For other issues, we cooperate with Japan. And yet other issues, we cooperate with the United States. That is simply the only way in which India can work to keep her interests alive and advanced in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was, again, a very clear articulation of what India's perspective is with regard to the Indo-Pacific. And I completely agree with you, sir, that at this point in time, we are going to have to depend on the India-France relationship, as also India's own sort of internal, I call it internal balancing, or the fact that we have to develop our own sinews to be able to face the challenges. But I actually have one question for you, sir, which would be that given all of what you said, and I would agree that this is not as straightforward as it seems from the outside. The fact is that the EU has a really diverse agenda. They're talking about maritime security, securing supply lines, a technology partnership, climate change, biodiversity, etc. I'm just wondering, is the EU going to have the financial wherewithal to be able to look at all of these issues, both in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean? Perhaps they would have the resources to look at the Western Indian Ocean. But in the Eastern Indian Ocean, as also in the Pacific, what's your sense of whether the EU will be able to partner with any of the regional countries in taking that agenda forward? Or is it that they're simply depending on the bigger countries like France and perhaps Germany and some others to essentially provide them with all of the resources that they need to make good on that strategy?
I think you're right, Abhijit. The EU's policy preferences outstrips the resource availability that it has. And that's a fact. But if you take issues, and two areas I see EU taking the lead. One is connectivity. The second is climate change. I've always called EU the connectivity superpower. They have an ambassador at large for connectivity. They are the only grouping that I know which has got an ambassador for connectivity. So I think they take connectivity seriously, and that includes digital connectivity, by the way. So connectivity, I would say EU should focus on because they are good at it, and obviously climate change, because the EU, to my mind, is a climate superpower. They've always been saying that we are all interconnected, that climate change should be taken seriously. Indo-Pacific countries are some of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. So I think there we can take EU seriously. Otherwise, we are looking at three key players. France, obviously, I said that. UK is playing an important role as well. They've started taking an interest. I know we are talking Europe and the UK has left the EU, but geographically, you will have to admit that they are still in that area. So UK, for example, takes it seriously. Germany, for the first time, sent a warship. And that was interesting for me in the Indo-Pacific area. So I think there are enough countries out there. My only point would be we will have to make sure that resources are not duplicated. If the United States is already doing something, I would like France or the EU to do something else. That way we can maximize the benefit for all of us. So that's the only point I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was very useful. I'm now going to turn to Dr. Nikkei for her remarks. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Yes, just I will jump from what has been already said. For instance, the question of not being too confrontational or, avoiding military competition. I completely agree with that. But definitely, when you look at the EU Indo-Pacific strategy, at the EU evolution on China, that is not new. It started in the middle of the 2010s. And particularly at the evolution of France's position, you see that there is a big change comparing with what was the case before. And definitely, even if diplomatically sometimes it is not as openly said, China is at the center of the EU Indo-Pacific strategy, and also France, of course, Indo-Pacific strategy. When I say at the center, I mean that this is a major factor of preoccupation, especially related to the sea lane of communication. It's extremely important. It is related to the security of the EU, and it has been said very clearly. And of course, for France, to go back to what the ambassador just said, France is a little bit different from other European countries, meaning that we have direct territorial interest in the Indo-Pacific, both in the Indian Ocean and also in the Pacific Ocean. Of course, capabilities are very limited, but France is one of the major players in terms of maritime security in the region. And remember that it was Le Drian, who was at that time Minister of Defense, who in 2016 at the Shangri-La Dialogue started to launch the idea of organizing coordinated visits by European countries' ships in the region. At that time, it was received with some skepticism, particularly from our UK friends. And of course, Germany was not ready to do it. But you see, as you mentioned, now Germany sent a frigate last year, the Bayern, to the Indian Ocean and around Japan and so on. So there are huge changes. And what I want to stress also is that with India, and like with Japan, for instance, of course, the major common denominator is that we do share values. And this is something that we do not share with China. For the EU and for France, China, as you know, everybody knows now, China can be a partner, for instance, in climate change. I'm not so sure about that, but anyway, let's say it can be a partner for climate change. It's a competitor in terms of particularly reciprocity in the economy, but it's also a systemic rival. And this is there. And Ukraine, just to finish, because I do not have much time, Ukraine is a good example. Everybody was beginning to say, and I think it's very dangerous, look at China. China can play a middleman role. It can play a very important role trying to persuade Russia to change its mind. No, China will not do that. China will just wait and see on which side the coin falls, and they will never jeopardize their relationship with Russia too early, waiting to see what happens. And they will try to keep some, good relations also with democracies and Ukraine. Ukraine was a very important partner for China. So I don't think that China can really play a very positive and constructive role. It will play the role that serves its own interest, not global interest. And this is a difference, I think, that we have with India. I will stop here because I don't want to be too long.
Thank you. That was very good. I so agree with the point that you made on values. I think that is the critical question. The reason why I think India and some of the other countries in the region can have a functional partnership with France, with Germany, with EU, is because we by and large share the same values. and that we are progressive, we are forward-looking, we are liberal in our outlook, and it makes perfect sense for us to cooperate. I also thought you made a good point on the fact that the EU is now for the first time thinking of positioning warships in the Indo-Pacific region. They're calling it coordinated maritime presence. This has been in discussion for a couple of years, but finally, I think this is going to come into fruition, and we are going to see some of these ships being deployed in the coming weeks and months. But I might actually have a question there, which is that coordinated maritime presence is a good idea because there's a number of non-traditional security challenges that the nations are facing in this region, and EU presence will certainly help in tackling some of those challenges. But what about capacity building? Isn't that an area that the EU should be looking at with a little more focus? Because the sense that I have is that capacity building has not quite received the attention that it deserves. The sense is that the EU is primarily interested in capacity building, perhaps a little bit in the Western Indian Ocean, to a degree in the Pacific, in the South China Sea, some of those countries. But this one gap which is there in between, which is the Eastern Indian Ocean, that rankles countries like India and some other South Asian states. So would you think that it might be a good idea for the EU to also consider some capacity building in this very critical space?
Definitely, and I think that capacity building is one of the important items in the EU Indo-Pacific strategy, and also France strategy for the Indo-Pacific. And there are cooperation, trilateral cooperation, for instance, with Japan. I didn't follow that subject very precisely, so I don't know exactly what are all the cooperation possible, but definitely this is one of the ways for the EU to play a positive and significant role, including countries in the EU who are not strong military, with an important, big military capability, especially naval capability. So I think that to participate into capacity building, including to help some countries to for better governance and things like that, it might help in terms of stability. And it might help also to desert some strategy by China. The weaker a country, the weaker the governance of the country, and Pakistan is a very good example or counter example. The stronger is China's influence in these countries. So I think this is also a very important point, the issue of governance, not to give lessons from the West or whatever in terms of moral principles or what, but I think China is really striving on, poor governance, poor transparency. This is something that we see in the Pacific, that we see in Africa, that we see in South Asia with countries again like Pakistan, and in some countries in Southeast Asia. So when we think of capacity building, maybe going beyond only military capabilities or whatever. This is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those very perceptive remarks. I just have sort of one observation to make, which we can discuss during the Q&A, which is that the China question seems to be discussed much more when there's India in the room. For some reason, I find that when the EU discusses these matters of the Indo-Pacific amongst themselves, the general sense is that China should still be treated as a partner rather than a competitor, because ultimately we want no confrontation happen with China, and I find that interesting that that when the conversation includes India, the China question is dealt with far more sternly than it is that when EU partners are talking amongst themselves about Beijing and its aggressive posture in the Indo-Pacific region. But I'm going to leave that for the Q&A. I'm now going to turn to Shrestha Nishad Ahmed for her remarks. Shrestha, you have the microphone.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. For me, I believe the European Union can be quite a bit of partners for India in the maritime perspective, because France is a major maritime power in Europe, and India is India has great capability and capacity in its maritime sector, and it's primarily working and growing in the maritime area. Uh, in the case of for France and India, because of the strategic dialogue and the partnerships, we have had many combined and joint exercises between the two militaries, like the Varuna exercise, and along with that, Europe has its European the maritime security strategy, the European Union maritime security strategy, which has brought a streamlining of all the what it can concentrate on, be it in European Union and now after the Indo-Pacific, but like how it can concentrate on the maritime sector for the Indo-Pacific. Like the UMSS is working, it has been working with developing capability development in the uh, Operation Atalanta like initiatives, the maritime domain awareness initiatives. So we have like the critical maritime routes. Those are kind of regional capability development initiatives which the European Union is working on. Um, the Primario 1 was like Primario 1 and now the Primario 2. And aside from that, like it is now in the Indo-Pacific documents, it has been work talking about the securing of the supply chains in the Indo-Pacific, because 60% of the global trade and energy trades is conducted through those routes. Um, so I believe that because it has so much of capacity, and India being a geostrategically in a very important position, even France France and even European Union recognizes the importance of India in the position in this after, and mostly after the AUKUS trade. Uh, I think it has been reiterated by the French that India is a dependable and a good friend for for the time being and in the area. So I believe France is a good driver for the European Union to develop its maritime capability and capacity in the Indo-Pacific region and also in the European Union. And in the even when the French Defense Minister Florence Parly was visiting India in December, she so focused on how the security of the global supply chains and the rules based order which needs to be ensured to like for the security of the global commons, for the global commons. Uh, the recent EU ministerial forum also saw the participation of a lot of regional organizations, which Aditya like pointed out the point of interoperability of the region along with of the both the regions along with the um, people and the like multilateral components of the two partners. Um, the External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar from India, he also talked about how this brought about this highlighted the like centrality of India along with the centrality of ASEAN to the for the successful securitization, like for the not secure, I would not use the word securitization, but like for the successful cooperation that the two regions can and the two bodies can work to work together in the area. In the question of China, I would believe that even though India is a neighboring state for China, so I believe like the landlocked boundaries can bring about a lot of issue instances of conflict, but it's better to maintain cooperation in both the sides so that there is not an increase in the amount of any kind of disputes between the two, like if it is possible. And in the case of Ukraine, there might be, even though China is currently seem to be not taking part in uh, any of this um, any of it, but I believe because Russia is very important for Europe because of the energy dependency of Europe on Russia. So I believe um, there needs I think Europe and Russia have to.
Right. So I think we've lost Nishat. Nishat, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
Yes.
I believe that because of the sorry. So I believe there is a thought in the Indo-Pacific region that the Ukraine crisis is bringing about a divergence in the security in the dialogue which was already happening between the in the region, but because of the energy needs, there might be a kind of divergence, which I believe would happen and is happening in the area.
Right. Right, Nishat, these are very interesting remarks. I think you've covered the maritime domain quite well to bring out a number of areas where we can make progress. I might only want to ask you about what's your sense about the logistics agreements that we have with a number of these countries in the region. My sense is that we're actually not leveraging these logistics agreements in the way that we could have, and we should actually try and do. Where do you think we can make better progress? For instance, the French 3 years back, when the French Chief of Naval Staff was in New Delhi, had proposed that we should do joint patrols in the Indian Ocean region. Has there been any discussion on that? You are from the National Maritime Foundation, and I am aware that the foundation does deal with a lot of retired and serving folks in the French Navy. What's your sense about where we are going with that endeavor? So essentially, what I'm asking you: are we operationally looking at ways in which we can leverage each other's strengths, exploit and use each other's strengths to our benefit?
I believe the combined naval exercises which are happening are intended to develop that interoperability between the two navies in the region. And apart from that, what was the other question? Can I?
No, so I was just saying about the two questions. One about the logistics agreements and how can we better utilize those logistics agreements to be hosting French ships, to be sending our ships into French territories. And second, on the question, as I said, of operations, joint patrols, is that an option for us? Has there been any conversation around that idea of doing joint patrols with the French Navy?
The Varuna exercises are an example of that. But other than that, there has been talks, and there has been interactions between the two countries, the EU and the NMF also, which is working on a European Union and India maritime security book to look at the security, the aspects which needs to be studied, which has otherwise not been studied earlier, and I think, for example, being participants in the operations like the Cremario 2 and that which has been funded by the Expertise France. So I believe these are the levels of operations which are happening currently.
Right. Thank you, Shrestha. So now I'm going to sort of open up the floor for a more freewheeling discussion, and I'm going to just sort of ask two broad questions. My first question would be to Ambassador Mohan, because he has to actually leave in about 10 minutes' time. But sir, I'd like to know from you that India and France just a few weeks back have announced a roadmap on blue economy and governance. And I found that interesting because in the initial strategy that France had come out on the Indo-Pacific, there wasn't much mention of blue economy, governance, themes looking at conservation issues, etc., biodiversity. But now they have, and now they have taken over this. They are taking forward this agenda with a great amount of vigor. Do you think France is the correct partner for India? And again, this the same question: will the French and the EU really have the financial backing, the wherewithal to be able to deliver on this agenda? Because to me, it looks pretty complex. And if you just look at, for instance, the budget for cleaning up the seas in South Asia, that runs into something like some conservative estimate is $50 million US to just clean up a sort of small patch Do you think that conservation, ocean governance, blue economy is an area in which we can have a substantive partnership? Sir, you're muted.
So thank you. Thank you, Abhijit. Now you can hear me. If you take Indian Ocean as the theater of operation, there are only three partners with which India can work: France, France, France. I am absolutely clear that there is no other preferred partner of India in the Indian Ocean theater. I'm not talking Pacific, because that's a very, very crowded strategic space. And this is because Indian Ocean, a lot of real estate, we mentioned Reunion Islands, there could be others. They have stationed troops. They have made investments in biodiversity in the Indian Ocean. Reunion is a classic example. So I have absolutely no doubt that the preferred partner for India in the limited theater of Indian Ocean is always France. You have a point about money, and that is going to be a problem. My sense is that if France and India can approach the World Bank, approach other agencies of funding, pool their resources, also ask the Green Climate Fund of the United Nations. If we can do that together, I see great potential, because France is a leader in conservation and climate change. There are two areas where I consider France the leader. One is connectivity, the other is climate change, especially biodiversity, without a doubt. And I think we should pool our resources, even put forward plans to multilateral lending agencies, put pressure on the other countries and say, you have to meet the Paris commitment of $100 billion a year, which has not been met. So if we can combine forces with France, I think there is a much greater possibility of India meeting its sustainable development goals. As far as blue economy is concerned, I will take only 1 minute. Blue economy is merely a holistic way of developing the ocean in a sustainable way. That is my layman's definition of blue economy. Blue economy is a very fancy term, but at the end of the day, you've got the Indian Ocean. You need to, the livelihoods of several people depend on the Indian Ocean. Can you do it sustainably or not? That is the question. Anyway, people are living off the Indian Ocean. That's happening now. But I think it is happening in an unsustainable fashion, whether it is fishermen, whether it is other folks who are living off the ocean. So the question of a blue economy is only that we introduce the concept of sustainable development so that the livelihoods of littoral states and people who are living off the coastline can live more sustainably and live more profitably. So I would say, Abhijit, without a shadow of doubt, with even taking into account your point about financial constraint, the degree of comfort that India has with France, it probably has with no other partner, frankly, strategic partner. So I would like to use it for things like blue economy, Indian Ocean, conservation, climate change, etc. Thank you.
Right, sir, that was good. But just a small follow-up, sir. Do you think that the French have it in them to energize the EU to take that agenda more seriously? I mean, I'm completely with you that France is a good partner. It's well known that they do connectivity very well. They do conservation well. But other than France and perhaps Germany, we've not seen so much of a push from some of the other EU countries. It's just EU as a sort of broad banner that we see make these statements. But do you think France will be able to lead the charge when it comes to non-traditional security issues, when it comes to conservation, biodiversity, etc.?
If you want me to be perfectly honest with you, I would rely on France, not the EU. Because I posed this question to Ms. Florence Parly when she was here. I had the honor of interviewing her. And one of the questions I posed to her was this, and she was honest in saying that France, as president of EU, has to take everybody's views into account. There are 27 European countries. That often means, Abhijit, that the lowest common denominator becomes acceptable. So I'm going to rely on my bilateral partnership with France for the Indian Ocean rather than the EU. Of course, I welcome EU investment. There is no problem. And we like that the EU has a strategy. But ultimately, I will have to look to France to make this partnership work. So France will drive the EU. There may not be consensus all the time, but I think I am going to put the money on the Franco-Indian strategic partnership, not so much on the EU-India partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was absolutely clear. And thank you so much, sir, for your participation. I realize that you've got to leave in a while, but I look forward to perhaps another conversation with you. But if I can turn my attention now to Ambassador Penno, sir, and I actually had two short questions for you. One was on this EU's Global Gateway Initiative that we've been hearing about, this initiative for smart and secure links in digital, in energy, in transport. There's been some talk around this, and there's been some talk of commitments being made by EU nations to pool certain resources to power this project. Tell us a little more about it. How is it going to be managed? When can we see this being implemented on the ground? Does it also include the Indian Ocean? And my second question to you, sir, if you're there, I'm sorry I can't see you, but I suppose you can hear me, which is that the AUKUS.
I am with you.
You're thank you, sir.
Yes.
So the AUKUS, that hasn't come up for discussion. I know that it's a bit of a sensitive issue, but as someone that's always felt for France, there was so much of sympathy for France when that happened in India. Although India was on the fence on this, we were not sort of taking any sides over whether we were with the US and Australia or with France, but there was a clear sympathy for what had happened for France. Do you think that that things have now changed? In the months that have followed since AUKUS was announced, the fact is that there has been some sort of rapprochement with the US in the wake of what's happening in Ukraine. It seems that France, US, Japan, Australia, other countries are willing to work together. So, or is this something that you are willing to now put in the past and sort of move forward? So my second question on AUKUS and the first one, global gateways.
Okay, so your first question, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, your first question about Global Gateway Initiative. You're absolutely right to stress the importance of this initiative. It is very ambitious. It is about combining resources from the EU institutions, from member states, also from national agencies, development agencies, and many others. Can you still hear me? Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're clear.
To work on concrete projects in the field of sustainable and inclusive connectivity. The ambition is very high because it aims also at leveraging the private sector financing, and we believe that we can raise up to 300 billion euros before 2027 with combining all these resources. And there's a link with the discussion you were having with Ambassador Kumar. And I think I would not agree completely with what was said about the EU action on protection of the oceans or blue economy, because these are clearly and have been already for some time high priorities for the EU international action. I think we have more a problem of visibility, as always with the EU. They're already doing a lot. And they will do more, and I'm sure. And the Global Gateway Initiative is also a means to, find new resources and combine resources between member states, EU institutions, and other sources, including the private sector, to have an impact. So I believe this will be done. The second question about AUKUS is, well, it's very simple. It's not a question of moving on. It's a question that we felt with the AUKUS announcement that our partnership with Australia was broken. because there was no prior consultation, no prior information. And the way our partnership was designed, of course, was very different from the way it was disregarded by the Australians when they made this announcement without consulting with us. And I don't think we have moved on since then with Australia. We still consider, of course, that Australia is a very important player in the Indo-Pacific, but I don't think we have made much progress in restoring the confidence, the trust that we need to restore, and that was sadly destroyed by Australia's government's behavior in this AUKUS sad affair. With the US, it's been completely different because right after AUKUS, we started a high-level consultation process, which I think culminated in Rome, in the margins of the G20. We made our two presidents made some announcements. We engaged much more with the Americans on the Indo-Pacific since AUKUS. We have engaged more. I think with the publication of the US strategy, we can see some areas where we can work together, and that includes, of course, the Pacific, but also other parts of the region and many, many issues. So we have moved on, indeed, with the United States after the AUKUS crisis, if you like. If I may take up more, 1 or 2 minutes, I wanted to go back to what you said about China. It's not only when we are with you that we discuss the Chinese challenge very seriously. It's also when we discuss, it's also there when we talk to Japan, it's also there when we talk to ASEAN countries, of course. And I would argue that the EU, Valérie Nicquet said that earlier, that the EU and France, of course, have come a long way in their awareness of what is really China's challenges to us. There was, you remember, in 2019, this EU policy that was adopted by all member states, was quite surprising even for me at that stage, which identified China, of course, as a partner. We still believe that we can partner with China on global issues. That includes China, climate change, but also seeking a common framework for debt treatment, many things, Iran, nuclear deal. But also China clearly is at the same time a serious technological and economic competitor. And it is also a systemic rival. And our relationship, both the EU-China relationship and the France-China relationship, have moved much more towards systemic rivalry in recent years. And it is a clear recognition. We're not naive. We're fully aware of the challenges and will be responsive to these challenges, which are created by the growing assertiveness of China. I wanted to make that point. And also Ambassador Kumar mentioned the rapprochement, possible rapprochement between the US and China, which would be, of course, a big worry for India. And it's interesting that I should mention that because it mirrors a similar perception that exists also in Europe, that the end game of this Ukrainian crisis could be also a rapprochement between Russia and the United States. But as far as China and the US are concerned, my personal conviction is that the US will remain strongly focused on competition with China. There is a bipartisan support for that in the House. This has been the policy followed by 2 successive presidents. And I think it will remain a cornerstone of American diplomacy. And I don't believe that it will come to any rapprochement in the coming years. So that is my personal view, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's for that clarification. If I can just ask you one follow-up question, if you're comfortable answering this, would France consider building Indian deterrence against China in the Indian Ocean? We've been looking for ways to to find ways to push back the Chinese assertive presence in the Indian Ocean, if not the Pacific. And the sense that we get is that a lot of our partners consider China to be a threat in the Pacific, but not quite in the Indian Ocean. France is one of those rare partners that recognizes the China challenge also in the Indian Ocean. Would France like to consider a more operational partnership with India in the Eastern Indian Ocean? What's your sense, sir?
Well, my sense is that we're very open when it comes to strengthening our partnership with India, which is already a very strong partnership, which goes back a long way. And I think we are already doing a lot together on maritime security. And this is clearly, there is a direct link with what you said about the China challenge. I think we're open to do more. It has to be discussed, of course, between, and it's not really my field, between our leaders. And but I think the mood in France is very much that we're open and that we consider India as a major partner in that region. And that includes, of course, you're right to point out that the Indian Ocean does not receive the same attention as the Pacific. It is certainly the case when you look at the US posture as well. So there is a potential for us to do more and to attract also other countries and to ask them to do more. And I think about Japan in particular. So yes, the answer is certainly yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So my next question, and these are going to be my final questions because I think we are sort of also running out of time now. My next question would be to Dr. Nikkei. Dr. Nikkei, tell us about some of these ideas that we are seeing from the EU and from France now about green finance, ecological transitions, something that the EU has spoken of earlier. But again, can we see a partnership develop in South Asia? South Asia, as you know, is extremely vulnerable to climate change, to sea level rise, to pollution. Can we see in the future a more focused partnership with France and some of the EU nations in cleaning up the oceans and sort of fighting the problem of non-conservation of resources in the space? You're muted, madam.
This is not exactly my field, so I don't think I have a very, informed answer to that. But definitely, this is at the heart of the EU and also France's interest. And I think that both the EU and France are extremely important to develop and increase partnership with like-minded countries on these issues. And definitely India and other South Asian countries are at the forefront of this cooperation and discussions on this. And as for the Pacific, as you know, France being one of these Pacific states because of the Polynesia and New Caledonia, we know that these regions also are extremely vulnerable to climate change, and biodiversity is also a very important point. So just one last point, nothing to do, sorry, with your question, but I wanted to stress it, is that I think that Ukraine it's too early to draw conclusions about how the world will be. The war is not ended, has not ended yet. But I think definitely what we saw in a matter of days, in terms of suddenly the EU becoming much more agreeable to the idea of using, the notion of Europe puissance, as we say in France. Everybody was very skeptical about it before, and now we see that changes can be extremely rapid in that sense. under the duress of circumstances like war in Ukraine. And this also will have consequences in what the EU wants and can do in other regions, including the Indo-Pacific, including in terms of balance of power, just to say it simply. So this is what I wanted to say to finish.
Thank you. So my last question now would be for Nishad Ahmed. Nishad, tell me, we've heard so much about India's Sagar philosophy, security and growth for all. We know that India looks at the Indo-Pacific region in an inclusive frame, and we say that this is a club that is open for all. But given what's happened in Ladakh last year, and also what we see happen in the South China Sea in terms of Taiwan, Chinese aggression in that space, and now what's happening in Ukraine, do you sense that India's understanding of Sagar now might undergo a slight shift, in that we might be able to recognize that there are certain countries that are essentially authoritarian, that are not willing to play by the rules, which essentially means that the rules-based order somehow does not seem to be applying equally to all partners. And that means that this understanding of inclusive security that we have perhaps does not apply in the same way to all our partners. I'm just asking you for your subjective view of how you look at this, and has there been any talk also in the NMF with your partners, etc., of this philosophy of Sagar, and the fact that we're somehow not able to finesse this philosophy in a way that we can derive good results out of it? Your thoughts?
I believe the philosophy of Sagar is valid where it stands, because it is looking at a certain direction. It is looking at the maritime direction. And essentially Ladakh, or be it Ukraine, those are mostly landlocked states, like states in the northern region. So India Sagar philosophy is although talking about the security and growth of all of its partners in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific. So I believe that stands there. But on the question of authoritarian rules, yes, I think there comes a point of unpredictability on how they will function. Like how a democratic state functions and how an authoritarian state functions. I think the unpredictability would come from something like that. And also on the question of rules-based order, I believe in some cases, rules-based order is something which a state is only willingly would wish to do, but rather maybe some states would look at a deals-based order rather than a rules-based order. Something which they agree on certain topics, and maybe not a holistic view, but only on certain topics. So I believe rules-based order is valid when a state willingly, like voluntarily wishes to do agrees on certain topics. But the deals-based order is, I feel, a more successful arrangement in certain cases when you are agreeing on a certain deal only.
So that's interesting. And I'm going to sort of stop you here, because this is going to be the thought that I'm going to carry with me, is that of a deals-based order rather than a rules-based order. But I'm not going to end there. I'm going to end by saying that I actually agree with the point that Dr. Nikke had made earlier in her remarks, which is say that our value system that we share with France does not quite agree with a deals-based order. We based on a values-based, a rules-based order, regardless of what the deal is for us, whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. And I think that's where that's one of the reasons why we are such good friends with our friends, because we agree on our values. But thank you so much to all of you for agreeing to participate today. I'm very happy and humbled that Ambassador Penno joined us today for this discussion, and also to you, Dr. Valerie, for taking the time out for this. You as well, Ahmed, for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, and thank you so much once again for joining us today. I think there have been some very interesting takeaways from this excellent discussion. Thank you.